Hello and welcome. It's an absolute privilege to be here with such an amazing group of people, including all of our viewers from all over the world. My name's Dr. Shelley James, and I'm privileged to be the host of our event this afternoon. And it is in fact the third in the culmination of our celebrations of the International Day of Light, which started with an Instagram challenge a month or so ago, actually, and we had over 50 responses. And our team of panelists today from different types of with different interests in light have selected some, and we'll be talking about those in a minute. And we also, on the 16th, which is actually the day of the International Day of Light itself, on Sunday, hosted a 24-hour live stream Zoom session, and James is going to introduce the recording that we made of that. But first, it's a real privilege to be here with Professor Anatoly Zayats, who is the head of photonics and nanotechnology group at King's College London, and it's really thanks to him and the amazing Megan and James that this event is happening. So over to you, Anatoly, for a couple of words.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this fantastic event. And this event, as Shelley said, is to celebrate the International Day of Light. I am co-director of the London Institute for Advanced Light Technologies, and as you can guess, we study light day to day, actually. This is our job. The Institute is intimately linked with International Day of Light because the formal inauguration of the Institute was on the very first International Day of Light. Since then, we always try to celebrate this day and had many wonderful events. This included both scientific event, artistic event, and also interface between science and art, organized in many cases by Shelley and Megan, so thank you very much, both of you. But this year it's something really special. I don't want to steal thunder from the fantastic group of people that we have here today who will tell you all about this humongous project. As Shelley already mentioned, it was like 24 hours Zoom recording, so we will hear about all this later. It is a bit cliché, but I'll say it anyway. The fact that we are here today, that this event takes place, is only because of light, because light connects our computers through optical fiber, so it connects us actually both literally and figuratively. And if you have not heard yet, actually just yesterday, the United Nations declared the next year to be International Year of Glass. And I think it will have many reverberations in both our scientific community as well as in our colleagues and friends among artists, because glass and light are really go together. So stay tuned for the next year, and hopefully next year we can see each other in person and we can do something really special to celebrate both light and glass. But thank you very much once again for joining us today, and thank you very much for this fantastic group of people who make it happen. Without further ado, it's over to you, Shelley. I am really looking forward to this fantastic event and discussions.
Thank you so much, Anatoly. That was, it's a real pleasure to be here. At least, yes, thanks to light again. This event is all about the shared language of light, and the first thing that we did was to invite people to share their passion for light through Instagram, the short posts. We'll see some of those in a minute, but also to share the fact that we all live under the sun. And so James is going to share the very small amount, sped up version of the 24-hour Zoom that we did, and then he's going to, so each of our panel members, we have, and I'll introduce you each individually, but they each have a passion for light, but on very different scales and in very different ways. So from James, who works with light at the nanoscale, through to Bob Mizon, who's an astronomer who works with light at the cosmic scale. But I'll introduce each of them in turn. So first over to you, James, who works so much with light, but at the tiny scale. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Shelley. Yeah, so we always trying to organise an exciting event for the International Day of Light. I mean, it's because we are always trying to get to grips with what light is, which is an impossible question even in the one discipline of science, right? Even in science, light is used in medicine, engineering, quantum science, astronomy, cosmology, technology. We use it all the time, and it's very hard for us to pin down what it is. And so with this kind of event, the best way to get a handle on what it is to discuss with people. And because it's harder to get into a room and discuss with people at the moment, we thought, well, what kind of can everyone around the world agree on around the subject of light? And I think that's probably the sun coming up in the morning, right? So we thought it might be nice just to record all around the world for 24 hours, just to get an idea of how the light changes across the world, wherever people are, in whatever environment they're in, even if they're inside, although most of these are outside. So that is the project which we did, and we covered 6 continents. We never got anyone in Antarctica, unfortunately, and I'm not sure how many time zones that was in the end, but we got a lot of them. So Megan, I think we can maybe watch our video now. The world premiere.
Thank you. So now James is going to speak briefly about his selection from the Instagram. And I just wanted to mention that on the panel here, after James, we'll be hearing from Kailash, Kailash Eben, who is the curator and editor of a brilliant art magazine called Trebuchet. And then we'll be hearing from Marianne Shillingford, who is the creative director of Dulux and is the queen of colour, has an amazing feeling for colour and light in a very different perspective. We're then going to hear from Mark Major, who is he's co-founder of Spiers and Major, one of the most amazing lighting design. He calls himself an architect of light, and actually that's exactly what he does. He has an amazing feeling for light and space, both within buildings and in the built environment, the urban space. And then we're going to finish off at a very different scale, which is Bob Mizon. Mizon, sorry, how often have I got that wrong? Who is in fact, co-founder of the Commission for Dark Skies and a passionate advocate for reducing the amount of light in our environment to reduce light pollution so that we can actually enjoy the night sky and all that has to offer. But over to you, James, who works at the nanoscale first.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Yeah, so I hope it's not a cop-out, but as a scientist, I did end up picking a lot of the sciencey ones because I thought maybe I could give a little bit of context to some of the things we were seeing. And now the reason that maybe I was muted when I started is because I was just trying to play a few slides and I realized one of the videos wasn't playing. So I've got an emergency backup, don't worry. So the first video I want to show you, in case it doesn't play properly, I'm just going to share my screen now and you will see it directly from Instagram. Here we go. So here's the video on Instagram, which was shared by Dr. İlhan Kandan at Dicle University in Turkey. And so you can just see that video, these beautiful lines, and hopefully it will play on my slide as well. But if not, you've now seen it. And I'm just going to switch to a different screen now. If you just give me a moment. Yeah, so as scientists, we work with light in all kinds of different ways. In fact, the way that I work with light is different even from the videos that we see here. That's not displaying very well, is it? I actually use light to move objects around, and in particular, I use light to lift things up, which does look just as cool as it sounds. And hopefully technical problems are now over and you can see my slide. Yeah, we good, Shelley? Okay, I'm going to take that as a good. I saw your mouth moving. All right, so this is İlhan Kandan's work from Digital University in Turkey. And what you see are these brightly colored lines. And it might look very attractive and it might look very simple, but actually this represents a moment which completely broke physics. So this is the physics of how things glow. And so around the about 1900, scientists were tasked with the job of trying to explain how things glow because electricity was taking off and people liked light bulbs. And it turned out that all of the models of science we had could not explain how these light bulbs glowed at all. It turned out we needed an entirely new kind of physics to describe this, which you've probably heard of, which is called quantum physics. And so in this video, what you see is there's a gas of helium and it's heated up with a really powerful electric field. It glows. And then if you look at that light and you split it out, you find that it's not like a continuous array of colors like a rainbow. There's only distinct colors. And this is like a fingerprint for the helium gas. And every different atom and molecule in the universe has a unique fingerprint to that atom or molecule. And this gave us the clues we needed to develop quantum science. And so this is a really direct way of seeing it. In fact, that's where the word quantum comes from. It means discrete, and we see these discrete colors. So that was the first one I wanted to show because I just think it's a really beautiful direct demonstration of that. Good. So then moving on. Here is my second video. So this comes from Dr. Lucy Downs at Durham University in the Quantum Light and Matter group at university. And this little ghostly image of the Greek letter psi is also actually quite an amazing thing. So this involves the electromagnetic spectrum. So when people think of light, I guess you only ever think of the light that you can see. And that's this little bit in the middle of this spectrum labeled visible light. Here we go, I've got a little pointer. So it's visible light, and that's what we see, and that's what people think light is. But as a scientist, I think of light as something much more. I think of it as stretching all the way from what powers your radio to all the way up to X-rays to see through your body. And there's a particular part of this spectrum which is interesting called terahertz. It sits between microwaves and infrared is just heat, like the heat you get from the sun. And terahertz radiation is great because it goes through your body, so you can use it like an X-ray, but we all know that X-rays damage your body as well. It's called ionizing radiation, so it causes damage to your body. But terahertz radiation doesn't cause damage to your body, so it's like safe X-rays. The problem is we can't see terahertz and we don't have any detectors which can see it, so it's really, really hard to work with. But what this team did is indeed they found a way of seeing terahertz, and they get a gas of atoms, they're called Rydberg atoms, it just means they've got a lot of energy. And they shine in some light, which is this kind of square of green light you can see. They shine in these invisible terahertz light, which has gone through some object, which is why it looks like that Greek letter. And what comes out, the atoms convert these two different types of light together into a third type of light, which you can see. So this is a video camera for invisible light. So this will be, I'm sure it's used in like checking that food inside packages is safe and also for doing harmless X-rays. And finally, here is my final video. So this is from the SEEC collaboration. Let me pull up the names of who's involved in this collaboration. So this comes from Philipp Hasslinger in the Technical University in Vienna, in its collaboration with Enar de Dios Rodriguez, Thomas Jufman, and Brannon Klopfer. And what we see here is actually the speed of light. So let me explain what's going on here. You can see there's a woman in a dark room. And so if I think about trying to take a picture of someone in a dark room, what I imagine is that I flash my camera and the woman will be illuminated all over her body, and that's what you then pick up on the image. But we're told that light travels at some speed. So if you had a camera that was fast enough, then actually what would you see is this wave of light traveling over the person, which is what we see here. So you can see a time scale at the bottom, and this is photography with a camera that's fast enough to see the speed of light. So you even see when the light travels between the woman and the wall at the back. So it's fully dark, and then the light hits the wall at the back. So I think that's just the most amazing video, in fact, photography at the speed of light. Shelley, those are my three videos. Sorry for the technical difficulties at the start there.
Thank you very much indeed. That was definitely worth the wait, even if it wasn't the speed of light. That was great. Thank you so much. I'd now like to pass over to Kailash Eben, who is a curator, writer, musician, man of many, many talents.
Just an editor, just an editor.
Editor, but you also write some amazing things as well. So a sort of a thinker about art, and creates, there's an art magazine called Trebuchet, which is a really fascinating read. And you're going to share, so you're coming at light from another very different perspective, patterns of light. So over to you to share your picks from the Instagram feed.
Fantastic. Megan, do you have those up to share? So the first video that I chose was actually from James, and it shows, well, I'm not entirely sure what it shows, but I think it's light acting to levitate particles. And as a person that writes about art and about things that we see, the idea that science can illuminate, sorry, pun intended, things that we don't normally see and really reveal some, just the keys to mystery and a perception of things we don't normally see is absolutely fascinating. And this is really where, you know, I think both art and science have that ability to make us curious and start to question things around us. So the next one, next video is by Rafael de la Fuente, and this one, maybe we'll turn the sound off. There we go. So we'll just pause it maybe.
There's a mute button at the far right of the play bar, Megan.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Almost.
There we go.
It was a lovely song, but yes, so the distance between the light source, the slit, and the I suppose the final canvas or whatever, or creates these kind of diffracted images, which I just think was a really lovely metaphor about perception and about how we sometimes see things, you know, analogies of woods and trees and those sorts of things. And this is really again a very kind of fascinating analogy for viewing what we see, and I think it's also quite ably demonstrated here. And the final video is from Michael Blomgren, and this is a video of quite natural scenes, but ones in this context at least really raise the nature of light all around us. So in this shot in particular, you see light reflecting in the background, in the foreground, on the water. The trees in the foreground are unfocused, and then within the air itself there were motes of light that we see. And then here we have various shadows and things, but it's an interesting interpretation of the world around us. And I guess it's just about this context really where we start thinking about how actually we almost, as we go through our day-to-day lives, have a very common sense or unconscious view of how light's affecting things around us, but actually we're affected by it in a multitude of ways all the time. So those were my 3 picks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's just really interesting because I think a couple of you have chosen the same video, and you coming. I think we're going to get very different perspectives on that. So that's really fascinating. Thank you again. I'm going to pass over to Marianne Shillingford, who is the creative director at Dulux, and she has another view again of colour and light. And so if you could just share your views, your selection, and why you chose them and what they mean to you. Thank you.
Okay. In my world, color is light is everything, and it only exists. Color only exists when you shine light on it. And I chose these 3 videos, which are absolutely delightful. I loved the whole process of watching all of them, but I chose these 3 to represent 3 different things. One was to please my heart, the second was to please my head, and the third was to please my soul. So hopefully I'll be able to express some of these. So could we play the first one? Is it De La Fuente? Could you play that one first? If you would. Leave the sound on, guys. Just immerse yourself in this. Just we can pause that there if you want to just and one of the things, I'm going to reduce the IQ of this group by quite a lot, because my response to this is just pure joy. I love the idea that light can sing. I also adore the combination of violet and orange. It does something to it. It gets my heart going like nothing else. And I also was watching as this beautiful video unfolded on a very simple level. I was actually sort of suddenly learned that there were femtoseconds and picoseconds and microseconds, and I was blown away by this. I mean, I don't understand really what I'm looking at, but it is just delightful. And sometimes I think we in my world, I'm looking for something aesthetic but magical, that I can interpret as a story and respond to in a visceral way, really. And I just absolutely adored this. It cheered me up no end when I needed really cheering up, and the colours are just adorable. So if we go on to the next one, this was for my head, and this was by Tim Vanderelli and Bending Light. Now, I am a great supporter of young designers who use light and young creatives who use light in an extraordinary way. And there is an artist, a young artist. If you write this down, the guy's name is Jordan Soderbergh Mills, and he will love the idea that glass and light is the year of glass and light next year. And he works with glass refracted through light, and the idea that you could bend light and see it, I'm absolutely blown away by this. I can't stop smiling looking at it. It's just wonderful. To actually bend color and to bend light, that's so magical. It's so magical. I mean, what possibilities could this have? How could that be used? So in my head, I was thinking, how could we use this? How could we use this, being able to alter the perception, be able to alter the shapes, be able to change the way we respond to the world, using a bent light? I just thought that was absolutely magical. And then the final video was for my soul, and this is by Bouquet Yene Dogan. I hope I've got your name right. Please forgive me if I haven't. But the idea of this beautiful video, which again was something that the salve that light gives us, the breathing in, when you breathed in, it was dark, a little bit like when we breathe in, we go. It's a holding our breath. It's that kind of moment before breathing out and the possibility, and then having this beautiful color and light, and the color only exposes itself when the light is fully there, and then it disappears again. I mean, How magical is that? And I was breathing along to this beautiful video. I watched it about 6 times. I was in a complete state of bliss, and I just thought that was beautiful. This idea of letting go, allowing the light in, and then the colour being exposed with the light. So there I am, pure romantic, and with a response to light that is joyful and almost instant.
Wow. Thank you so much. Completely, yeah. All of your selections have been so interesting, and your approaches to them have been so fascinating. So thank you. Yeah, for a completely different take, and again, a reminder to celebrate the amazing light in the everyday. So thank you very much indeed. And yeah, okay, I won't say any more. Mark, I'd be grateful.
Hi.
The stage is over to you. So Mark is an architect with light, and his work, you will have seen it, experienced it, if you've gone to London. I mean, anyway, Mark, you've made some choices yourself, and over to you.
Yes, I thank Shelley. I chose a couple of videos, so Megan puts them on, one of which we've already seen. And I think I was challenged as part of this exercise to see if I could find echoes in our own work in terms of some of the experiences we saw in these videos. So if you, Grace, Megan, if you want to play the video. I really liked this piece about water. I thought it was water something, as you'll see, that we as lighting architects interact with a lot in different circumstances, and we use it in different ways. And I kind of like the fact that there's a sort of, it feels like there's a narrative to this video, and we see the effects of light on water in so many different ways. Particularly, there's a section coming up which I really like, where you almost feel like you're sort of in the puddle, looking up, just on the basis of the reflection through the through the water. So yeah, and water is very interesting in architecture and landscape, where if it's sort of moving, then you light it, but sometimes if it's not moving, then maybe you can leave it as a mirror. So so just sort of thinking about our own work, which I'll explain in a second. This was a technique that we used ourselves at an international competition that we won many years ago for the Zollverein Kokerei in Essen, an abandoned industrial plant that we relit as a nocturnal park. And the water was actually part of the lighting idea. There was no water there before, but we put in 800 linear meters of water in order to poetically reflect the industrial plant at night. Can you have the next slide, please, Megan? And we did something very sort of similar, working with John Pawson on the Sackler Crossing at Kew Gardens, again a few years ago. This isn't a bridge, it's literally a walk across water, across a lake, and again using sort of the reflective qualities of light in almost still water. Again, sort of enhance that experience of walking across the water. In the next slide. And even on sort of commercial projects such as King's Cross, this is Pancras Square at the heart of King's Cross, working with Robert Townsend, the landscape architect. Again, we decided as a concept with Robert to sort of use the reflecting qualities of the water at the heart of the landscape piece. So this wonderful video really reminded me of the sort of importance of natural materials in the built environment as a sort of means of particularly reflecting and playing with light. If we go to the next video. And well, great minds think alike. I loved this video by Bouquet. And again, this idea that sort of light breathes, I think is something that we've talked about in our studio before. And I just love the sort of the gentle rhythm of this video, the way that the sort of trees appear and disappear, you know, turn from silhouette into a positive colored texture. So this really resonated with me, and you'll see why in a second. So if we go to the next slide, and because again that as soon as I saw that video, it instantly reminded me of a piece of work that we did with James Corner Field Operations. They're the landscape designers, did the High Line in New York, and they also did the southern part of the Olympic Park after the Olympics in Stratford, which you may have visited or you may have seen. We as a team sort of came up with this idea of reinforcing this concept of boulevard with these metal spheres, galvanized steel spheres that sort of light projects through to create sort of dappled shadows. Next slide. And you can see it has a sort of very textural effect. And I just want to finish with my own video to show why I chose breathing light, and because it's sort of just so, for me, expressed so beautifully these sort of the soft rhythms and movement of when light and wind and natural materials collide to create this sort of very poetic light that is very beautiful. I won't show you the whole video, but I just want to show enough of it to sort of show how these sort of experiences of light in the natural and the natural environment or the built environment really sort of, that sort of softly moving shadows. And you're seeing, I think when people move through dappled light, it's particularly beautiful. I mean, yeah. You can understand the relationship, but why I was so attracted to the video, because for me this is very sort of beautiful. So, and I just love the sort of soft shadows that light naturally creates when interacting with natural material. And just 2 more seconds. I just want to show you the people moving through that light, which I think this sort of, yes, this is what I mean. I think this level of interaction of moving into the light, out of the light, into the light, out of the light, and with this sort of dappled light, just in if all our streets were lit this way, then I think they would sort of perhaps be sort of more imaginative places. Anyway, thank you for listening to me, and congratulations to the makers of those 2 videos, because they're really fantastic.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was fascinating, and it's lovely to see how the videos relate to your own practice as well. So that's great. And I can see bouquets here, which is lovely. So our last sort of intervention from our multidisciplinary panel is Bob Mizon. I hope I've got that right this time. Yes, who is the founder of the Commission for the Campaign for Dark Skies, which has become a global movement to reduce light pollution. And Bob is going to, and has actually, received many accolades for his work in this field. So perhaps you can just share I think you're going to share actually the video about about the work of your campaign, and then we'll have a brief comment about that afterwards.
Yeah, before Megan plays that video, I think, yeah, she's about to do it. Okay.
Biodiversity, the variety of life on planet Earth. In 1980, a study of just 19 trees in the forests of Panama revealed that they were home to 1,200 different beetle species. And that's only the beetles. The trees, the immediate habitat. Micro-worlds of textures, pathways, hideaways, intersections, foods, battles, pairings, life and death. The forests, the larger habitat. Stars in patches, moonlight filtering, light enough to live the night. And darkness, huge habitat of half the world. Ambush the unsuspecting, forage unseen, avoid the predator if you can. Most of the world's land species are nocturnal. All nature knew that night once, as shield, as secret place, as active space or resting space, faint lit by far, far star clouds and creeping planets, and the moon for half the month. Constellations of biolights, of fireflies and glowworms mirrored the stars above. The night, habitat of the teeming trillions that crisscross it, live it, and thrive dusk to dawn. That huge habitat, the cloak of night, now frayed and torn, eroded, riven and ravaged by stray light, wasted by sports and roads, and the back garden insecurity lamp aimed randomly outwards and skywards. Light cast by the species that escaped the forests and grew a brain big enough to invent a world, but not subtle enough to protect one. Repair the night, learn the night, have light, careful light when needed, where needed, only, if only. Heal Earth's scars, protect the night, light with care.
Thank you, Megan. I'd just like to add to that short video a very short piece that I wrote sometime recently. It's about an adventure, if you like, with light. And they call astronomy the science of faint lights. And the fact that most of us can't see those faint lights, those stars that created every atom in our bodies, is something that I think is worthy of a very wide debate. This is called Mr. Price's Pineapple. For 70 years, I've thought back to Mr. Price's Pineapple with fondness. Mr. Price was very tall, very Welsh, and the best teacher I ever had. Just after a devastating war, which had left many of the buildings around my East End primary school in ruins, he would fill the minds of his class of 48 rough little East Enders with wonder. Now look here, boys and girls, this is called a pineapple. There it was, held above his head. Mr. Price had a friend who was a ship's captain and would bring back from his travels all sorts of exotic things then unobtainable in Britain for the class to see and handle. Before I ever started school, my father, with only a rudimentary education, had taught me to read on his knee from the Daily Herald. So during reading lessons, Mr. Price sent me to the school library to get on by myself. Entranced by the mighty ships which in those days came up the Thames into the London docks, I wanted to be a sailor and quickly devoured the books on travel and ships. But one day, on that shelf, I discovered a misplaced Larousse Encyclopedia of Astronomy. What wonders! I couldn't put it down. In a nation impoverished by war, the streetlights went off well before midnight in the early 1950s. Staying out late to the annoyance of my mother, I learned the constellations, rejoiced at the flashes of meteors, and followed the creeping motions of the planets. And I never became a sailor. I've been teaching astronomy, but mostly French, to children of all ages and adults since 1971. Most recently in an inflatable travelling planetarium. Thank you, Mr. Price. Teachers have told me there are two things that light up the eyes of small children: dinosaurs and space. I know from experience that there's a great thirst for a view of the stars among the general public. Recently, before the COVID shutdowns, 650 people turned up on a cloudy, wet evening at Guildford Cathedral for a stargazing event I was involved in. They knew they would see no stars, but wanted to hear the talks and see the telescopes. Hardwired into all of us, I believe, is the mystery and wonder of the starry sky seen eons ago from an African rift valley, an inspiring and thought-provoking firmament now hidden away from most of the world's population by light pollution. Some world governments and regions are taking this seriously and have taken action, but in far too many places the stars are not even a distant memory because there's nobody left who remembers them, and no administration that cares much about that missing half of our environment. We've all grown up in a world where excessive and ill-directed lighting is more usual than environmentally sensitive types. The light from distant stars and galaxies has taken hundreds, thousands, even millions of years to reach our planet. Isn't it a tragedy to lose it in the last millisecond of its enormous journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. That was a wonderful way to round up this little series of interventions from our panel members. Just before, I've had a couple of questions in the chat, but before, and I know that Mark sadly needs to go shortly, but I just wanted to ask each of my panel members what light means to them. And I guess what we've seen is that actually dark is as important as light. So I'm going to begin actually with you, Mark, just in case you need to go before. So just a moment or two about what does light mean to you?
Well, I mean, light is what I handle every day, but coming at it from the viewpoint of the built environment and as an architect, I suppose that what we tend to do is we visualize the built environment, particularly after dark, as a blank canvas or as a black canvas. Bob will be pleased to hear that we start with darkness. And in fact, he knows very well that we talk as much about darkness as we do about light. And then what we try to do is only add as much light as we need to in order to reveal the built environment in an interesting, creative, exciting way. I mean, for us, less is always more. And actually, one of the problems that we have working with the medium is often we're fighting those things that Bob is talking about. We're fighting light pollution created by bad design, as opposed to good design. So for me, to answer your question, light very much means exploring all its relationships, both to built form, to surface, to materiality, and also its relationship to its counterpart, shadow and darkness. So we think about all of these things in one go. So that's sort of the way we think about light.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's why your practice is so celebrated, is because you have a sense of the power of contrast and how that works. So we're going to talk, Marianne, perhaps because you're involved with the inside of the buildings more than the outside. What does light mean to you?
Well, light is the difference between a colour being successful and not successful, or one of the things that we're obsessed with in paint. So my world is all about colour in paint. Is having colour fixed, and of course you can fix colour in one light, but the light changes as it moves across the sky, and the colour changes infinitely during the day, and that's what I absolutely love about light and colour. And it's actually what my company hates about light and colour, because when we create a colour, it has to look the same for everybody. But I love that dynamism that light affords all colours. And I think that actually there's a great revolution in the way that people see colour and respond to colour in their homes. And this fluidity, this ability of colours to change and look very, very different and create a different environment in different rooms has become something it definitely much more positive and much more dynamic. So, light is it's just everything. It's everything. Colour doesn't exist without it, and I wouldn't be here either. And it's the dynamic nature of light that excites me.
Thank you very much. I think about dynamic nature of light. I'm just going to move on to James and then Kailash after that, just thinking about the cultural perspective. So James, perhaps you could just say what light means to you, thinking about dynamic, because in your world, light is actually a force. It's actually a material, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, even more, I would say that in my world, light is a tool, and it's kind of like the most precise, kind of exquisite, useful tool that I think that probably humanity's ever mastered. And it is the form of energy which we certainly have the best control over and have probably found the most utility for and continue to. And I also think a lot about that light which you can't see, because you do have to remember, even if it doesn't seem immediately obvious, that energy inside your microwave oven is light, and radio waves are light and X-rays are light, and yeah. So I just think it's just the most useful thing that we've ever mastered. Not that we invented it, of course.
Thank you. And Kailash, when we were speaking the other day before this conversation, we were talking about light and sight and whether the two are synonymous. And actually, I think James touches very interestingly on that point, that is light simply just a general name for all of that spectrum of radiation that goes from the visible to the invisible and beyond. So perhaps, Kailash, you could just say what light means to you in your world.
Yeah, I mean, it's not everything, but it's pretty close to everything. I think having written about art for 20-something years, it's been a key factor in, you know, what we see. And for humans, sight has been something of an analogous concept to understanding. I think, you know, James's point that light is possibly our most exquisite tool is, I mean, where do you go from there? It's probably true that the discovery and use of fire, as much as it was about heat, was about light in the darkness, you know, and that's such a strong analogy that carries through so much of art and understanding and everything to this day. One of our great questions that we were chatting about when we spoke earlier, Shelley, was I was wondering whether actually we'd reached a point of understanding about light that we were starting to understand some of the ways that light has a effect on humans that isn't strictly visual. And then you raised some fascinating points about how the eye actually perceives non-visual light, and that has an effect on us. But what does light mean to me? I don't think I have a simple answer to that, but it's a lot.
Thank you. And I mean, I think Bob and actually Jack kindly raised a question in the chat, which is that the light that we perceive as humans and been using as a tool, as Bob said so eloquently, has actually been used as a tool of destruction, and certainly is other creatures on this that we share this planet with are responding to wavelengths of light that we can't see, but that are actually pretty powerful for them. So perhaps, Bob, could you just say, it sounds like darkness is important to you. Is light dreadful? Tell me if you kind of are an anti-light man.
Well, as a creature of the night, with my little telescope always at my side, you might think that I love dark and I don't like light, but of course this is absolutely not true. The faint lights that come to us from stars and galaxies and the reflected light of the sun from the planets, these are wonderful things. They're inspiring, they're joyful, and it's a huge pity that more people don't look at them. We're becoming more sort of interiorized these days anyway. People tend not to go out as much as they did. But in the recent COVID outbreak, a lot of people have told me that, you know, they have been outside, something to do, if you like, and they've looked at the stars at night and they've thought how wonderful they looked. And this is mostly due to the absence of aircraft contrails, I think, in the sky. But light is a wonderful thing. I rejoice when I see the lights of the stars. I rejoice when I see beautiful light work within a building, for example. I once worked at the Hayward Gallery briefly, and there was a sort of kinetics and light exhibition, which was absolutely tremendous. And so, yeah, let's have light. Let's have lots of light to make people joyful, to make them happy, to keep them safe outside at night. But quite simply, if you're outside, put it where it's needed, please. The whole world doesn't need our wasted light.
No, or wasted anything, let alone the other creatures. And I think another point, and you've all touched on that in different ways, that we use light to see things and to reveal things in different ways. And I just wondered whether, in your view, that light is an art or a science. I'm going to speak to you, Mark, or something in between.
Yeah, well, I mean, light is absolutely both an art and a science, and I think it's difficult to sort of, I'm passionate about both. I wish I was a better scientist. I'm not a scientist at all. Like, I'm more from the art side, but I love science, and it sort of appeals to me in every way. And having come to light through architecture, I often feel that actually. I often talk about light being the sort of, almost like the soul of the building, because you can make great architecture, but actually when we walk into, let's say, a fantastic cathedral or into sort of any beautiful space, what often sort of makes the difference, what actually elevates our sort of emotions, is the interaction of light with the built form, with the material surfaces, with the color, with all of those things. And so to me, the sort of you need to be knowledgeable about the science of light, and you need to understand the sort of functional reasons behind the use of light and what I do, but you forget at your peril how important it is that, or how it is that light makes you feel. So it's not just light makes you see, but it's how it makes you feel that is also absolutely critical. So yeah, of course, it's both an art and a science in that respect.
Thank you. I suppose part of that question was the way that all of you in different ways through your crafts make choices about the way you use or whether you use light, whether in the way that you choose to make a video, the way that Marianne would choose to light her work, or any of you. So perhaps Marianne, tell me what you think. Is it an art or a science or something in between? I have a feeling I know where you would sit.
Yeah, you're going to say something in between. I mean, we have so many colour scientists at Axo Nobel. You know, we've got one of the biggest collection of colour scientists in the world working on colour and paint, and they are the most creative bunch of people you would ever have the joy of working with, and the way that they think. The combination of the way I will approach something in a creative way, in a more decorative way, an aesthetic way, and the way that they will approach it in a scientific way. Together, there's this magical moment of spark that they are the best people to work with, and I can see a possibility with something that they're doing that they might not be able to see, and they can see possibilities of what I'm doing, and together it creates this wonderful chemistry. So yeah, art and science, they can't be separated, surely not.
Thank you. It's not the two worlds at all. James, you're next on my screen. What do you think, art or science?
Oh, I don't think these are two different disciplines, to be honest.
Agreed.
So, I mean, if I see that there's a comment in the chat saying light is well-being, and you know, the light is a reaction. You know, light is just some wave out there, but we experience it in some way, and we experience it in a tangible and physical way. I mean, you know, your circadian rhythms governed by light, and the same for all animals. And you know, you can put little optical fibers and put light into people's brains to give them therapy and stuff. And this is science, you know. And often we need light as our tool to see science happening, right? So light doesn't come from nowhere. Sorry for the double negative, but light certainly does not come from nowhere, and it's always evidence that something has happened. Whether that be in astronomy, the faint lights that Bob mentions are evidence for stuff happening out there. And so, yeah, I think they're kind of like a fingerprint for things happening, and I don't see how that's different from art, really.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. Thank you very much. Kailash, in your role as art writer, do you see light as an evidence of things happening?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. It's the medium of things happening when we view things visually, as we see things that are reflected via light. At least for visual artworks. I was trying to come up with something slightly cheeky, saying that you know, science is an art, and therefore it's all light is only an art. But I think we're all really talking about the same thing. There's elements to both in the study and appreciation of light that is quite circular.
Thank you. Bob, light, art or science, or both, or something in between? I mean, I suppose part of this question was that things like the images that we see of the galaxies, they've been in the colours that we see that they're shown as they're essentially creative interpretations of wavelengths and different types. And I just wondered if you had some thoughts about how our experience of light, particularly light from the stars, is very much mediated by a creative interpretation. Can't hear you, Bob. Can't hear you.
Right, sorry, I was muted. When we look at the images from the Hubble Space Telescope, from some other lesser known but equally wonderful telescopes that are orbiting our planet, away from the sort of sea of gases that blocks out a lot of the wavelengths, we see that it can indeed be very artistic, because a lot of these pictures are taken with different filters in order to capture the redness of hydrogen or the greenness of oxygen, all sorts of wonderful effects. And they are, in fact, if you like, a bit photoshopped, because the scientists are deliberately choosing the kind of filters that will bring out what they want to see. And sometimes you see astronomical images that have been doctored in order to simply make them much more beautiful to the eye, which is where the wonder of color comes in. We are a species tuned to colorful things. You know, we see in a great range of colors, and astronomy certainly doesn't disappoint when you come to look at its images. And by the way, the next time you do look at the stars, if you're able to see them, try to see those colors. Look up tonight at Arcturus, which is quite high above your head at the moment. It's orange. Try and have a look at it.
Okay, it sounds like. I wondered, so I've got an interesting question in the chat from Daniel. I'm just going to ask a quick question of you then, Bob. Do you feel as if the way that people are doctoring, essentially sort of photoshopping our images of the stars, are changing our ability to really sort of understand them and analyze them correctly?
I don't think it stops us from understanding the stars if we simply make them look a bit pretty. But certainly, I think if anybody has changed an image, they ought to fess up in the caption and tell you a bit about how they've done it, because that too is an interesting thing. How to make a nebula green instead of red. It's something that is not a bad thing really if it looks good.
Then presumably in your work, James, you're making those sorts of decisions too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I must say that more in my work, like I say, it's using light as a tool. So I'm thinking, well, what's the best kind of light to use for my job? And you know, that can be a balance of many different situations. Like, you know, do I want my object to be really shiny? Do I want the light to bounce off it? Because of course, just because green light bounces off something doesn't mean red light will bounce off it, for example. So I would say that I more pick my light for the job at hand.
That sounds like it's as though I was hearing Mark talk, actually. It's a lovely way that at the different scales, because Mark mentions very poetically that he thinks of light as sort of the paint, as the brushes, and the work that he creates as the tools, and it sounds as though as the paintings, and it sounds as though it's the skill of the painter, not the quality of the paintbrushes necessarily. It's to do with the combination of the two, which is a really interesting analogy at both those scales. So I'm just going to, we've got an interesting question from Daniel in the chat, which is a question for Marianne. Are you finding that less people are buying coloured paint in preference for using white paint and making use of RGB lighting products? Do you have any
still quite early days there. I think that's a younger thing to do, but I thought that would be a real revolution in how people were painting their homes, but that doesn't seem to have happened. I think it will. I think it really will. I think people understand the benefits of having light therapy and changing the mood with colour very, very quickly. So I think it's something yet to come. I thought it would catch on much quicker, but not quite yet. We're just on the edge of it, I think. Yeah.
And presumably, thank you. I mean, I'm guessing that's the same for your work, Mark, with different, when you're looking at sort of lighting the outsides of buildings, you can create quite dynamic scenes. I've seen quite a lot of rather gruesome, actually, buildings that are under colour changing lights. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, you saw that red coca eye that we did, and when we do use colour, we tend to use it with an idea. So that was somewhat overexposed, but it's really a very dim, rusty red light. It sort of is all about decay, or suggesting sort of decay through light. That was the sort of idea behind the project. But no, I mean, a lot of the color changing that goes on in the city drives me absolutely nuts, because, you know, why would you? It's a bit like going into a room, and Marianne will appreciate this, and saying, 1 minute, well, I'd like this to be a green room. No, actually, I've changed my mind. I want it to be a blue room. No, actually, sorry, got that wrong. I need it to be a pink room. It's just crazy. Why would you do that to a space or the outside of a building willingly? I think the most interesting thing, though, to sort of, and I was just listening to what Marianne was saying about sort of, paint and light, is this difference between additive and subtractive color mixing. I mean, if when we're kids and we learn to sort of paint, It's all about subtractive color mixing, and eventually, if we mix it all together, it ends up as black. Whereas if you work with light, of course, it's completely the opposite sort of way of thinking. Eventually, we end up with white. So it's as we mix the colors together. So I would encourage everybody in a way to sort of play with those two concepts of sort of working with subtractive and additive color mixing, and sort of discover the differences between them, because it's a really sort of wonderful world.
Mm. And I mean, actually, if and everybody looking at this on the screen will see this, will see that's what we're looking at, isn't it? Really, Bob, you've got your hand up.
If you want to see, I'll call it a building. If you want to see something that's beautifully lit, a work of art, and doesn't throw light all over the place, it's the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. Next time you're in Bristol, everybody, okay, have a look at that at night if you can. And the lights on the bridge are so carefully directed that it picks out the whole thing as a beautiful tracery of light, and it looks wonderful, and it doesn't waste a single photon as far as I can see. So 3 cheers for that one.
Thank you very much. And it sounds as though, I mean, you asked the question, Kailash, about non-visual impact of light on us, and I think the impact on the natural world is something else that perhaps is worth considering. I mean, any other thoughts on that? Somebody's got a baby.
Oh dear. Somebody's not happy.
Somebody's not happy. So, I mean, thinking about light and dark and the impact on the environment. I mean, Marianne, in your work, do you spend time thinking about the impact of light and the things that you do in terms of using colour and reflection to change our experience of a space?
It's the way that colour in an interior is going is much less about the aesthetic and much less about it looking beautiful, much more about how it's going to make us feel and fulfil the needs we have of our homes. I mean, if you think in lockdown, we've all been using our homes in incredible. They had to work so hard. At home is the workshop, the school, the place we relax, the place we work out. Everything happens at home, and so people have been using colour to create zones to actually sort of make the home work harder. And we can't sleep. Levels of anxiety are through the roof, and so to create a space in which you're cocooned by colour, where the colour of the night sky is probably a colour you paint your bedroom rather than a pretty pink. So we're using colour to make life better on a really fundamental level, I reckon. And I know my world is just paint, but it's really interesting to see how people engage with colour. They want to know more about colour psychology, if that's the thing, and the human experience of colour and how we immerse ourselves in it. And that's hugely interesting, and it's a lovely way to develop from colour just being merely decoration to colour being much more important. We know this, don't we? But it's nice that people are catching up and using it as a real tool to make life better.
Thank you. Yeah. So if you think about what we'd be saying about light if we were doing this in 5 years' time for the International Day of Light in 5 years' time, what would you say, James, in your world, what would be the next big thing?
Wow, the next big thing in light. I actually had a look, and in the last 20 years, there's been 11 Nobel Prizes in physics awarded for the study of light. So there certainly is gonna be something. Actually, definitely not wanting to sound I don't know, nepotistic or something, but actually maybe it's going to be around the kind of work that Anatoly Zayats, who introduced this event, does around so light. Why does different light look different? So why does some light look green and some light look red? And it's because it's a wave, and the length of the wave changes. It's called a wavelength. And something we've managed to do in recent years is actually to control light at a level even smaller than its wavelength. We always thought that was the limit. The smallest thing you could do with light was its wavelength, which is roughly 1/2 millionth of a meter. Which isn't actually that small by most of our scientific standards. Light's kind of a bit clunky in terms of its size, but we can really manipulate it at the very, very, very tiniest levels. And already for 20 years we've been able to use light to kind of control single atoms. So maybe this control, or also we increasingly use light for communications. So not just in fiber optic cables, but you can encode very special signals in light, for example, using quantum mechanics. And it's becoming increasingly common now for people to even be able to send these very delicate states of quantum light from the Earth to satellites and back, to send kind of, super encrypted messages for, if China wants to do a bank transfer with Switzerland, they're not sending a checkbook. They're using their own specialist satellites to do it.
You're going to bounce it off some of Bob's stars then.
Oh yeah.
Kailash, if you were thinking about light in your world of art and culture in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, what would you think?
Well, it's probably the movement into virtual reality and augmented reality, which is creating very personal experiences of light that are not necessarily limited by our experiences of how light functions in the day-to-day world. I think that's going to open, or has been opening up, vast ways of the interactive nature of light, at least in virtual environments, which seems to sometimes be feeding back into the real world as well. Artists are getting more exploratory in things that they can do with light in the real world, inspired by limitless potential around that. So yeah, watch this space, really.
Thank you. And Mark, if we're talking in 5 years, 10 years time in your world of the architecture of light, what would you say?
Yeah, I hope in 5 to 10 years there's a response to what's going on with climate change and the environment, and some of the things that Bob was talking about earlier in terms of our impacts on ecology as well, and the impacts on people in cities, that we will learn to treat light as a much more precious commodity. We take it very much for granted. We go into a room, we flick on a switch or raise a dimmer, and we expect there to be light. In fact, we tend to notice light most when it's not there, if you see what I mean, in a power cut or a sort of blackout, or when something doesn't work. And so my feeling is, or my hope is, in the next 5 years, that we do two things. One is we learn to, as I say, treat light as a much more precious commodity, as a visible source of energy. And secondly, that we very much begin to appreciate the qualities of the night, not just darkness, but just what I would call the qualities of the night, because actually it's a sort of it's a beautiful experience. And it doesn't mean to say light, artificial light and the night can coexist, but it just needs to coexist in a rather sensitive and beautiful relationship. And so I hope in the next 5 years we'll see people really beginning to understand that more, and that that will be the direction of travel.
And how are you going to make that happen, do you think?
Well, I think there's two ways that will happen. One way, I hope, by education and persuasion, but I fear, and only because I'm not a great fan of regulating things, but I fear that actually, if we don't mend our ways in terms of the way in which we use artificial light, sort of excessively in some of our built environments, that we will begin to regulate the way in which light is used. And I'm hearing that a lot now in the work that I do, particularly in cities, about sort of local government and even national government beginning to talk about regulating artificial light. But I think it'll cause all sorts of problems, unforeseen problems. Like every time government regulates anything, there's always a sort of flip side, isn't there? So I hope it's through education and not through regulation, but we'll wait and see.
But something needs to change.
But something needs to change. It certainly does.
Thank you very much indeed. Marianne, you mentioned that. I'm just going to finish off then. You mentioned about the sort of psychology, the personal experience of light. I'm just going to finish off with Bob then. What's your feeling about in 5 years' time?
Well, talking astronomically, we are building larger and larger telescopes. The James Webb telescope will go up there and look at all sorts of wonderful things. We are discovering, we have already discovered.
That's fine. Sorry, give me yes.
So we've already discovered that there are billions of planets out there orbiting the stars that we see, and even stars that we can't easily see. And this has repercussions for the possibility of extraterrestrial life and things like this. So is there going to be an enormous sea change in our view of what we really are and what our lives are really about if we suddenly discover that there are other Earths out there with sentient beings? how the heck do you communicate with them? Who knows? But you know, the grabbing of more light by bigger and bigger telescopes is possibly going to revolutionize the world in unexpected ways.
Wow, it sounds like you might want to just borrow a couple of Anatoly's quantum lasers. What were you going to say something there, James?
I was only going to say that even actually, you know, recently the biggest advance in telescopes is the invention of gravitational wave detectors, and even those detectors work using light. They don't detect light, but they use light to do the detection. So you even need light for that.
Mm-hmm. It's all about light being a sign of something happening. It's about the evidence that you pointed out earlier. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts from my illustrious panel? I know that Marcus sadly had to go, so he sends his thanks. Any other thoughts or comments? Marianne, just one final point that you'd like to make about light, or the shared language of light, and being part of.
I don't know. I am being bathed in the most extraordinary light here, which is the loveliest thing ever. And one of the things that we do lots of polls about what's important to people, you know, in the year ahead, and the thing that came out of all of our studies around the world was windows. The ability to see outside, the big luxury, you know, of our lives is what we can see beyond the pane of glass, and how it affects us. And here, yes, it's beautiful, the ever-changing light. So yeah, nothing intelligent to say, but something very heartfelt about this beautiful commodity that we take for granted.
It is the shared language of light. It's the thing that we all share fundamentally, isn't it, with everything on this planet? So thank you, completely agreed. We don't need anything more than that. I think that's perhaps the point of all of this. Kailash, last thought or two?
Yes, I was just thinking that one of the things I think then and now, it's interesting to think about how light is a harbinger of attention. So in Mark's work, when he puts a light on something, it draws attention to it. So it's interesting to think about that dynamism, which also, you know, when you think about the cosmos and the need for darkness, it's about where we focus our attentions and what light we perceive in that way.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way to think about it. Bob, any last thoughts about light?
To everybody who's watching this, try to see more of the stars. Whether or not you have to travel to some dark place, go and see them, possibly when the regulations allow, and think about life and the universe and everything as you contemplate the stars, because remember, they're your chemical parents. Say thank you to them for making all the atoms in your body. It's a wonderful thing looking at the stars. See more of them.
You're a star yourself. That's a really fascinating thing to say. Thank you. And James, the last thought.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would say that there are only two different ways that we can gain any information about nature and about reality. So one of them is maybe electricity, and the other one's light. And you certainly can't see electricity, right? And we can see, you know, light from the most violent events in the universe, you know, like exploding stars. And we can see light. In fact, even the human eye can see light from a single atom. So really, it is like the most perfect gift we've been given to understand the nature of reality.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a profound way to finish. Thank you.